Hi, and welcome to the Bin Men podcast. We know that the Christian life can be hard to figure out, but we also believe that everyone should know the next step for making their spiritual life more important to them. We have entitled this series on soul care, When Life is Tough. And today, we want to discuss an important issue that at some point will affect all of us, and that is loneliness.
Which you will never feel if you just put the Binman podcast episodes on repeat. We'll become like your family.
We're here for you.
For you.
Real creepy, real fast.
For you. Yeah, I don't like this anymore. And unsubscribed.
Let's talk about what do we mean when we talk about loneliness.
How about you define something sad for once?
I'll define it. Great.
Define it.
Loneliness is the feeling of being alone, isolated, and helpless.
Yeah.
You feel cut off from others. Folks can't understand you. You're suffering and you're isolated from them.
Yeah. Which even if you are around people all the time, you're going to feel some point in your life. Mm-hmm. It could be situational, environmental, relational. And that's natural because God created us for us to be in community, to be in a relationship with Him and relationship with other humans. And in a broken world, it's not uncommon and it's going to happen. You're going to feel loneliness at some point.
Yeah. And I think that's a good definition. How would you describe some of the symptoms when someone is feeling lonely?
In general terms, probably the easiest way to identify it when you're thinking of loneliness is that it's marked typically by sadness, by longing, especially when, you've got this yearning maybe to be with someone and you've got this empty feeling.
I feel like you're ready to go into like an old country song right now.
I was about to before you interrupted. Pops was going to give me the 1-2 count and I was going to take off. Continuing with loneliness, it though can also lead to other manifestations. So it can also be causal. You can, see anger as an outcome, irritability, clinical depression, and more severe cases that can in time lead to suicidal ideation or feelings. So I think just before we launch in, just to be cognizant of kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah, good. Mm-hmm. There is a distinction I think we need to make for people viewing or listening, and that is that loneliness is not necessarily the same thing as being alone.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you're pointing that out. So I'm going to kind of take the mic on that for a second because I think that's important, especially maybe for folks who don't experience a ton of loneliness. Maybe you're like older and you're married and you have 12 kids or something like that. And you're like, I don't get it. Why does a single person feel this way? And they're there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. They're two different things. A person can be alone without being lonely.
Yeah.
And a person can feel lonely in a crowded room.
When they're not, right.
Because alone just means you're by yourself. Mm-hmm. Lonely means you feel isolated.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to tell a story about this because there's a big difference between me and my wife, Caroline.
Okay.
So my wife, Caroline, before we started dating, and she was single, like she loved being alone. She chose to live solo in her apartment, to have a solo apartment. She worked out alone. She enjoyed her evenings alone. She loved just being restful, being re-energized, and then just reaching out to friends when she wanted to. She was alone, but she didn't feel isolated. She wasn't lonely.
Yeah.
Me, on the other hand, I almost always felt lonely once I was alone. So I chose to have as many roommates as possible. Like you guys remember my stacked little apartment where I was like,
I'm pretty sure you had 6 adult men in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor in downtown Indy.
I was like, at one point I counted and I was like, I think I had somewhere in the range of 11 roommates in 5 years.
In that one apartment?
Or something like that.
I believe that.
Not at the same time, but over the course of 5 years.
I thought you meant when your touring circus friends were, okay, but never mind.
That's exactly right. So and I would work out at a gym. I'd try to fill in as many evenings and weekends as I could with people or even just making phone calls, right, to people. Because I knew once I was alone, I was going to be more likely have feelings of loneliness. Yeah. And man, those feelings could tempt me in all kinds of different ways.
Exactly.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to distinguish that, particularly because on the other end of the spectrum, solitude can be incredibly, incredibly healthy.
Yes.
Incredibly healthy.
Yes.
It's not just aloneness. It can be a constructive opportunity. And I'm thinking right now of the men's retreats I'd go on when I was at my church in Southern California. Those are some of the most spiritually refreshing times of my life. But it was weird because you'd go with 30 other adult Christian men to a camp sort of out in the mountains in California. And you'd be like sealed to a blood pact of silence for the first 48 hours. And that's just how it was. All meals were eaten in silence. It was constant silence. And in fact, the only time we'd break silence was to worship. But I think about that as a tool, recognizing that by intentionally reducing the noise and the busyness of life, you do in fact create clearer channels of communication between God and you in your heart. But more on that. So TLDR, solitude can be very helpful, especially in clarifying your relationship with God, and 2, paying extra attention and nourishing your spiritual life.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing, and that is being intentional about solitude. It isn't always possible, and it certainly wasn't possible when the kids came along, but we're talking to young adults, and if it's possible for them to find that quiet time in the morning where you can have solitude, and Dave, exactly what you said, that communion, that communication with God, I think it's great.
Yeah, I remember times when even being in like a dorm room in college was kind of too much. I was like, I need to take a moment here. It's been a while since I've been like really alone. And we'll wake up like earlier, go out to a park, and like truly be totally by myself and just like, okay, Lord, like meet me here. I don't have an agenda, but like I just want you to meet me here.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we as Christians make ourselves sensitive to those particular persons who are going to be prone to being.
Yeah, let me ask you this question. Yeah. So there are several groups that are at risk for loneliness. So like, what are even some particular groups that maybe they're just a little bit more at risk to be lonely?
That if you're listening to and identify as, we can be on your guard a little bit better.
Yeah. So teenagers are obviously, when we talked about our depression issue and the increasing rate of suicide, teenagers are particularly prone to being lonely. And the reason for that is their only other peer group, people that they would seek out to help them with their issues, are other teens who don't necessarily have a good handle on life yet and answers to some of the problems that they're dealing with. That's one of the reasons why I think it's such a good idea to be in community with the church and to create a good familial relationship between parents and teens. Another group of folks are single adults, and these are single adults who necessarily choose substance abuse or moral failures, and because of their own embarrassment, they choose to isolate themselves from other people.
Or just I could say we'll say more about that, but keep going.
The obvious example is if you change jobs or if you move to a new community, you leave family, friends, relationships behind. A particular group that Mom has made me so aware of, especially over the past couple of years, are women who are single, women who are single parents, they may be divorced, and a group that we too often forget are moms of small children, right? One group that I saw, especially when I was practicing, that are very lonely, these are folks that have disabilities. People just don't know even how to interact with some people with disabilities, or people that have long-term illnesses are in and out of the hospital for long periods of times. And speaking as a mature adult, being mature in this current culture can lead to tremendous loneliness, empty nesters. And as Mom and I get older, one of us is going to go first. And if you're grieving the loss of a loved one, you're just going to be lonely. So you may have to, and the reason I bring this up is you have to sometimes probe a little bit. If you're a caring and compassionate Christian, look behind that fake mask of smile that everybody puts on every Sunday at church and see if you can't inculcate yourself into the life of someone who might be feeling lonely.
Well, and I add to that, like, that's helpful for me to know and helpful for me to hear, because maybe you're a part of one of those groups and maybe you're not. But I think, like, for myself, I was like a 25-year-old dude. I'm thinking to myself, I'm the only one struggling with loneliness. No one else gets this. No one else feels this. Instead of realizing, like, I could be in a small group or worshiping in a sanctuary. Someone right behind me is like a single mom, or someone behind me is an empty nester, or they're a grieving widow or something like that, going like, wow, we don't have the same stage, we don't have the same story, but we both are wrestling with this, and we can help one another in it. So again, another thing that's beautiful about the diversity of God's people in the local church, but Yeah, anyway, that helps me to hear that it's not just like, single young adults that wrestle with loneliness.
Yeah.
It's a lot more.
Yeah. When we talk about loneliness, there are both right ways and wrong ways of dealing with loneliness.
Yeah.
Let's address some of the wrong ways so that at least people know that we're sensitive to that.
Yeah. When you think of the wrong ways of dealing with loneliness, they'll probably become exceedingly apparent. They're the things that you're doing to fill that void, to fill that gap.
Yeah.
And to be honest, most of them are just usually pridefully motivated, and they are selfish, because basically what you're doing is saying, I have this thing, this hole in me, and whatever the trigger or the cause was, I need to sort of self-medicate.
Yeah.
So when I think now, as somebody who's almost a 30-year-old millennial who reflects on my life and my community, I'm really keenly aware of what some of those self-medications are.
Yeah.
Most of my friends, you move to a new city, and so what do you do to not feel lonely anymore? You start downloading all the dating apps.
Yeah.
Now suddenly, where once you were a stringent believer in a solid community, you're much more tempted to either personal sexual sin, sleeping around, or at least compromising your own purity or sexual morality at some level. You can turn to things, and the two that are probably the most common in my mind are, one, like physical material possessions.
Yeah.
I have a friend of mine who had a massive life change and went and bought like the bougiest car ever, bought a way nicer apartment, all these type of things. And I'm thinking kind of sequentially, like, there's probably a massive dopamine rush that gives you a sense of control in your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
We talked relationships, things, actual substance abuse.
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I have a lot of friends who are literally my age that are functioning alcoholics.
Yeah.
Even I historically have struggled with like creating a margin. Like, you can have one glass of wine at night, but like, just make sure one doesn't turn into four inadvertently because you're out grilling with the friends. You know what I mean? It is such an easy slippery slope because it makes you feel good. And when you feel good and you self-medicate through any of these channels, you hurt less. You feel less that loneliness, at least for a small amount of time. Because at the end of the day, what does loneliness do? What's the problem here? It's you intrinsically doubting your worth to God and who he's made and designed you to be, and a disbelief that that's true. Because if you believed it, you wouldn't self-medicate. You wouldn't seek out a new partner every weekend, and you wouldn't go to the bar and blow your paycheck every. You know what I mean?
I hate to put you on the spot.
Would not exist.
Yeah, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I
will.
But I am.
But I will.
I think what you just said about doubting your worth to God is so powerful. And I also loved about how you were talking about all the other things. And in one of our previous episodes, you talked about Pascal and Pensée.
Pensée.
Yes.
I still don't know how to say it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just make it up. We're Americans. It doesn't matter.
Leave
Pascal's book.
Yeah. But that each of us has this God-shaped vacuum.
An infinite hole.
Yeah.
It can only be filled by what?
God.
An infinite love, an infinite God.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do we handle loneliness biblically?
Well, yeah, there's a ton that the Bible says about loneliness, whether it says it directly or whether it's through the stories of the saints and God's people throughout time. Like, I think especially about the Psalms. Holy smokes! Like you just start reading through the Psalms, and if you've never done it before, like you're not used to reading the Bible, I think you might be shocked that not all the Psalms are just like, God, you're so good. God, you're amazing. In fact, like a ton of them are crying out in pain and suffering with enemies in loneliness. But I'm not going to talk about all that. I'm not going to talk about all the stories because I think maybe the most comforting truth in the Bible is that Jesus understands our feeling of loneliness and sympathizes with our weakness.
Yeah.
Again, that's Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15. And like, if you just walk with me for just a second, just pinpoint, go directly to the cross, he felt the ultimate loneliness.
Yeah.
When he's taking on all of our sin, all of the sin of the world, and was separated from the Father, uttering these horrible words, my God, why have you forsaken me? In Matthew chapter 27, right? Which is quoting a psalm, by the way.
Yeah.
And it's because of this separation, Jesus being the one to experience separation, that guess what? We get to experience relationship what the heck, right? Like that if we embrace what Jesus has done for us, taking what we deserve, being separate from God, that we can actually be restored to God.
Right.
And so we can have the most intimate fellowship with our Creator that we were created to enjoy. So that like in some senses, think about it this way: if you're a Christian, you have a secret friendship with God that you take with you everywhere you go. Whether you're alone or whether you're with people, that God's Holy Spirit literally dwells within you. And that's what we want to keep tapping into, like even as we develop healthy relationships with other people in community as well.
That's so great. Do either of you think that any good can come out of loneliness?
Yeah.
I want you to continue on this because you said some good things about solitude.
Yes. And I have a good example in mind, but I think the short answer is yes. And here's the long short. It will force you to have an utter dependency on God. Again, there's no time like a time or a season of struggling with loneliness for you to do a reassessment and go, I mean, shoot, even when you've got a great community and you're not struggling with loneliness, you should still be butting up against this reality that, am I fully depending on God? What's the status of my relationship with Him? When you think of Corrie ten Boom, right, somebody who went through literal Nazi concentration camps, a quote I'd written down, I think is really, really convicting. She said, "You never learn that Christ is all you need until Christ is all you have."
Yeah.
And I think, man alive, in a time and a culture where we are inundated with the curse of more, buy this, consume this, upgrade this, subscribe to this.
You can be connected to 1 million people all
simultaneously. Isn't that ironic that in a day and age where we've got more connectedness, suicide rates are skyrocketing in America's youth, depression is skyrocketing in basically all demographics across the board. So that ain't it. It's not a lack of opportunity and connectedness, but again, like we've said, dependence on God, very intentional community building with those around us.
Well, then let's move into that, because that was so well said. What suggestions would we have for listeners or viewers on how can we best deal biblically with loneliness?
I'm going to have you do 3 on this, Dave.
But I never do 3.
You always tell me to do 3. You do 3 on this.
Well, this is an easy one. Like we've said now on the Binman podcast multiple times, what's the antidote to combat self-focus? Because that's fundamentally what loneliness is.
More ice cream.
And
focus on God.
So ice cream and focus on God. We're going to tweet that out and say, Bob, 2021.
Ice cream is pretty good.
So
this episode is sponsored by.
That's right. So God, and then community and serving. So you go vertical and horizontal.
So these are like 3 different relationships
that you stoke to combat loneliness. Because again, if you're focused on God, your community, and proactively serving, it's almost impossible for there to be margin of that self-centeredness, because that's fundamentally, unfortunately, what loneliness is. It is a disproportionate amount of attention given to yourself and whatever its motivations and manifestations. So
you talk about God then.
In the God vein, do everything you can to engage and pour yourself into that relationship. And the 2 main channels, like we know, are prayer and saturation in the Word, right? So this relationship, this dynamic between you and the Lord, receiving Him and being in communion with Him. But also recognizing that, like, this relationship's never going to end. So it's not like you're just going through, like, checkpoints.
Isn't that amazing?
This is for all eternity, from the day you were born and then saved, and then you continue a prayer life and you matured, and then you had this struggle, and then you had this trial. That all is in the evolution and progression of this one relationship with the Lord. Like you said, the secret friendship with the Lord that you can depend on. That's always there as your underpinning.
Yeah, and that we call it a secret friendship, but we know that it is Holy Spirit. It is God living inside of believers. What a blessing that is. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
With community.
So I don't want this to sound so super.
Not the show.
Yeah, right. I don't want this to sound so super spiritual that it's like the only part of this thing is like just pray more. You never feel lonely.
You won't be
again.
depressed anymore.
But we're also absolutely not discounting that.
No.
Our intimate relationship with the Lord is the only relationship that we have forever. But It's a relationship with God, but let me talk about relationship with community, because it's not wrong to want to be with other people.
Absolutely not.
God made us for intimacy with other men and women and a need to feel like you belong somewhere, right? That's kind of built into us. Even at the very beginning, God gave Adam a helper in Eve. So pour yourself into finding healthy relationships in your life, right? In your context, especially through your local church. Because I think, man, older Christians can totally encourage you, kind of like a spiritual parent or as a leader or even as a pastor. Christians who are your same age can totally walk alongside you and like empathize and spend time together, just even spending fun and building relationship. And Christians who may be younger, I think of teenagers, right? Some of the coolest people are like 26-year-olds who are like, man, I serve in student ministries because I don't want this young teenage girl to suffer the same loneliness and struggles that I had when I was her age. Like you just have no idea the blessing you're going to be to younger people or people who are just newer in the faith.
Seriously.
To figure out, man, I'm lonely all the time. Why shouldn't I go to the bars every Friday? Like, why shouldn't I just go buy the coolest car? You can walk with them. So, man, Bible studies, small groups can be great ways to get into this sort of age-diverse community and just take a step toward putting healthy people, especially Christians, into your life.
Yeah, that's right. Then I'll continue and end it with, so then the serving piece, in my opinion, a lot of the time is probably it's probably the most impactful antidote, because it relieves so much of that built-up tension. When you self-eval and you think, what am I aching for right now? What am I missing? Is it a girlfriend, a friend, a community, a mother figure, a father figure, a mentor, or this or that, whatever? The reason why serving is so impactful is because it sort of takes all of that pent-up energy that's corroding you inside and making you feel like you're not enough and craving other things and attention that you may then devolve into self-medicating or whatever. Serving through whatever level rechannels that thing. So at a simple level, you can serve by giving a call to one of your friends you haven't talked to in a year that you know may be walking through a hard time in life or not, but you showing that intentionality can be huge. Doing something small and sweet that you hope goes unnoticed to your spouse. Another great example.
Or your next door neighbor.
Or your next door neighbor.
In the apartment next to you.
Somebody you don't even know. Why is it that in every Christmas movie ever, it always, the ultimate lesson, the thesis of the movie is it's better to give than to receive. There is something ingrained in us by nature.
That's right.
At a bigger scale, though, like you can engage in a Boys and Girls Club, become a teacher at your church, like you said, be a mentor, big brother, big sister, whatever. Not everyone, there's no singular prescription I can give you that if you serve in this way, you'll be cured. But that's why the church is a mosaic. There is an opportunity in front of you that if you're honest with yourself today, has already probably been presented to you. And you went, oh yeah, my grandma keeps sending me these emails about going and volunteering at the church and doing this thing. Heck, try it out. I mean, if you're struggling with loneliness, there's not much of a better appeal than getting into the church and engaging the body and just loving.
And you don't have to be an expert. Like don't have to be some sort of magic teacher in the church.
Everyone thinks you do to get started.
Go rock babies in the nursery. Go help set up chairs before the service. And you'll be amazed to see what God does.
You know, we talked about with God, with community, and with service. That's all really good. But doesn't that ultimately require us to do one thing? And that is, we need to set up a plan. We need to really plan about doing these things, especially if we're feeling lonely. Because when you get lonely, I'm just telling you, you're so self-focused, you're so miserable. So you really do need to choose to do these things. And probably the best way is to make a plan.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. Especially if you see rhythms, like moments when you know you're going to be lonely. Like you go, like when I drive home and I walk into my apartment and I'm there by myself, I just know I'm going to feel lonely. When it's Friday night or Saturday night and I haven't made a plan and I'm just chilling on my own and all I have with me is Netflix or something like that, like I know I'm going to be lonely. And maybe there's other instances too.
Sure.
That's where you can be like, let me think ahead of time to know, well, what's my plan? Or I look at my life and I go, look at all these things I don't have, these relationships. Like they're talking about the local church and they're talking about like calling people and like, I can put that into my life. I can schedule phone calls. And you don't have to be Mr. and Mrs. like everything goes on my calendar. But if you already have a plan in place for
have a couple
Thursday,
things in your toolbox.
Then you don't have to struggle in the same way. It's just noticing the struggle and making a plan for it.
That's right.
That's so great.
A little bit of planning can save a lot of loneliness.
Well, we come to that point in the podcast where we ask, so what? What practical applications can we share with our viewers and our listeners that can help them or their loved ones or their friends with loneliness?
Yeah, I would just say you're listening to this, which tells me that you are already an intelligent individual. You've chosen to spend some time listening to the Binman podcast.
Good looking.
And you're probably very attractive and worth a lot.
High IQ.
Clearly. So live creatively in engaging your loneliness. I don't think it's inappropriate. I don't think it's inappropriate to say that, like, you can embrace loneliness as an element of your spiritual maturity and just take it for what it is. Just like the episode we did on suffering or depression or anxiety. Just recognize it for what it is, but don't stop there. The but continues to move, and be strategic in how you're going to have this plan fleshed out so that at the end of the day, you're not stuck focusing on yourself, but can instead primarily orient yourself correctly between you and the Lord and his church and your community and his creation.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, just a couple other touch points, practical applications, like concentrate on right now. So you don't have to worry about, like, am I never going to get married?
Over the
Or,
next
like,
21
or, like,
years.
what if I never fit in here in this city that I'm in? Like, yeah, just concentrate on right now, today, this week. What does God want you to do?
Yeah, you can't really impact that 20-year. You can today, though.
You totally can today. That's right. And I would also say, again, with this idea of starting small, like, find just one trustworthy Christian you can start sharing your struggles with.
Yeah.
Older, younger, same age, whatever.
Yeah.
Because that's going to help. It's going to let you vent some of these feelings and emotions and just be known.
Yeah.
And it only takes one person to help with that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's two, maybe it's three, but just find one.
Yeah. And, you mentioned this, that we don't want to come across as super spiritual, like
you are. We're probably not.
Well, yeah, and I am
with the
criticized for
blazer
being kind of.
territory.
I know.
I'm
you have
preachy.
A blazer, you immediately.
I know, and
level up.
I'm preachy. I get it, but there are a lot of causes for being lonely. I kind of addressed those earlier, but it's interesting that the cure is always the same, and that is the comforting, loving fellowship with Jesus Christ, and. If you know Christ, if you are a follower, you can rely on that. If you don't wait another minute to accept him, to put your faith in him. In his go ahead.
Oh, I was totally about to say that quote from Augustine.
Go ahead.
That you love. No, you share it.
Well, he said that, Lord, you have made me for yourself. And my heart is restless until I find my rest in you. Jesus is a friend who sticks closer to you than a brother. I mean, think about that. As one of you all mentioned, he laid down his life, right? The Good Shepherd laid down his life for each and every human being. And for those of us who have chosen to put our faith in him, he promises he will be with us, for us, as our advocate forever.
Yeah. No amount of human relationships, whether they're in real life or whether they're digitally, a million followers, are ever going to make you unlonely in the deepest way. Only a relationship with God through Jesus will.
Yeah. Why don't you give us some call to actions?
If we hit 1 million subscribers, then I wouldn't be lonely anymore.
So let's so thanks to that, like, call to action. What's your next step this week? Man, if you struggle with loneliness, your step this week is make a plan. Plain and simple. So what are you going to do this week that's going to help you pour into your relationship with God, your relationship with some community, and your relationship to serving in the days and times that even you're going to struggle. So if you've been wrestling, should I join that small group? Should I serve at my church? Should I do a Bible study? Should I hang with this group of people? Maybe the answer is just yes.
Yeah.
Like, so this week, it doesn't have to be every piece of a plan forever, but this week, make a plan and let us know here, like in our comment sections or on socials, what were some of the things you did? What were some of the parts of your plan that helped? Maybe it was something I remember. My habit was, you know what? I need to call somebody on the way home from work. That was helpful for me. So what's helpful for you? Let us know on our socials. Let us know in the comments below, because we love hearing from you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you both. And thank you for joining us for this episode of the Ben Men podcast. We know that the Christian life can be hard to figure out, but we also believe that everyone should know their next step for making their spiritual life more important to them. Bin Men exists as a resource ministry to help you discover that next step.
Yeah, so feel free to check out the show notes on binmin.org as well as our other posts, blogs, and resources. Engage with us on the YouTube channel, on social media. Leave us a comment, subscribe, and hit that bell notification to be notified of when new content is coming out as well.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We'll look forward to next time. God bless.